By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes, and it's a mean left hook from the opponent. Shakespeare with punches is how one critic has described trying to organise what wrestling is these days to fans. And when you're sitting there and listening to one of the organisers, which is what we're doing in this episode, as I talk to Heathen Combat's Michael Greene about the challenges that come with trying to put on wrestling matches in a COVID era where you've got restrictions on people who can be there and restrictions on who can come and go from different parts of the country, you really get an understanding of exactly how stressful it must be, but also the amount of work that goes into it from the start to finish, as well as some of the positives and negatives that can come out of such a strange environment. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Stick around at the end so you can catch all his details and you know where to follow him. It's a scary time.
It is fucking terrifying, yeah, man.
Yeah. So tell me, wrestling.
Yes.
Let's get on to the right topic. And
Let's go to the actual interview, eh?
I'll cut the rest of it.
Yeah.
So organising wrestling events obviously takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort to coordinate everything, and then you get thrown into a lockdown. How do you bounce back from something like that? How do you process something like that?
So we were supposed to have our next show next weekend, the 11th, and we'd planned the whole show around the date, September 11th. We were running a whole angle where one of the guys whose character is, he's the young Nats. And his whole thing was a conspiracy, and we just sort of jokingly tied it in with the date. Obviously, that's been cancelled. But prior to that, the show we'd had in May had actually that had undergone heaps of changes because of the travel ban.
Yeah, because you get performers in from overseas, don't you?
Yeah. So we were supposed to be the first company in New Zealand to bring in an overseas talent since, I think, February of the year before, where we were the last ones to bring one in. And we booked the whole show around it. We had Joel Bateman, Smash It Joel Bateman, who runs Deathmatch Down Under in Melbourne, who was going to come over, and he was main eventing our show against a young guy called Horace, who is now our champion. And the whole reason for that was that we were giving Horace a massive opportunity. Joel's a really good friend of ours, and he was actually in the process of sort of winding down his career. So we were like, cool, we'll give you come and wrestle overseas before you wind down your career. It'd be real cool to have you over. And it'd be a big deal for the first show back with international guests and stuff. We're like, cool, that works perfectly. And then the Tuesday of the week of our show, Melbourne went, and we closed the travel bubble. So frantic a couple of days, had to rebook an entire show. Just about every match that was on that show, which was originally like an 8-match card, every match of it had to change in some way due to injuries, had a couple of illnesses, and of course Joel not being here. But on top of that, it also threw the whole narrative of the show, because a couple of weeks prior to this, we'd been told by our champion that he was severely injured. And needed to basically step away from the ring, so we had to strip the belt off him. And the plan was to have Joel run the whole buck New Zealand, Australia's number one. He'd basically blackmail his way into getting the championship, and then in the main event, Horace, who we had, thankfully, without even planning this at the start of the year, given him an open contract where he could cash it on anyone for any match he wanted, would cash in his match, and Joel will make the title match and win the championship. Take Joel out of the equation, I then had to rebook an entire show with a new big bad guy, a new storyline, and make it all make sense. So this is the kind of stuff which COVID's done. We had to completely rebook an entire show, which meant had to rebook entire existing storylines, which affects the entire forward motion of the company. Losing the show we've got next weekend, our next show is the 20th of November, which is our 2-year anniversary show. And I need to have a show between the show we've just had and that show there in order for the storylines that I'm telling to make sense. So by losing the show next weekend, I've now had to sit down and think, okay, could we run another show between then and now? Can't really think of that because we don't have an idea as to when we'll go down to level 1, which is the only real place you can run shows.
So you guys can't work under level 2?
No, the venue that we work with, the place /altitude. have pretty much said, well, it's not really feasible because you've got roster, you've got crew, you've got audience, and it's the whole building and stuff. So it's not really the smartest idea. So we decided it's not really worth the hassle. So yeah, we'll run at level 1. So we were like, okay, so we've lost an entire show, which means that we have to rebook entire storylines. And it's not like 1 or 2 storylines, it's like the central storyline of the entire company, and all the ones that tie around it. So I've lost a show. I've lost now making the things I was going to do at this anniversary show in November make sense. So, and it was, the worst part was as well as we'd started the advertising and the promotion, and the promo videos and stuff from the roster, and the talent had just started to come out for the show. So at this point, I mean, the moment we knew that we weren't going to run the show, I had to sit down, and I've got like a book where I write all my ideas, and everything, and like the I have like a 24-month plan at any given time as to what I'm going to do. And okay, scratch that out. How do I move everything forward? So that's the basic thing of it. It's like, it's the best way to describe it is like, imagine if you're doing a TV show and like an actor who plays a character dies. And you have to completely rewrite a whole show around that. Ross McLeod, the really, really lovely theatre critic we have, who is a massive wrestling fan, he comes to all of our shows, compares what we do to, like, imagine going to see a Shakespeare show, and between you've gone like to opening and closing night, and between opening and closing night, they've had to restructure the whole story, and now you've got like an actor who played Romeo in another show is now showing up in like King Lear. And that's the way it has to be. It's like, well, I have to completely retell a story and make it make sense narratively, and not make my audience feel like they're idiots, I suppose.
I think that's also the first time I've ever heard anybody compare wrestling to Shakespeare.
Oh, it's Shakespeare with punching, man. It's as simple as that.
Shakespeare with punching. I like that.
Yeah. It's great. It's wrestling is the only theater where you can react to the audience, and the audience's reaction can affect the show.
Okay.
There's been times where I've been running a match and the audience has reacted to something, and I've said to the ref mid-match, I was like, pass this message on, we're going to do this instead. I've completely changed plans for a wrestler or a character based on the reaction they get from the audience. I've had to completely restructure the entire company when somebody has announced that we were building the company around, announced they were retiring. And then I've had to sit and look at it and go back and have a video footage. I was like, well, who has the crowd reacted to? Who have everyone gotten behind? And that's kind of how we ended up with Horace as our champion, because Horace is sort of a hometown boy. He's been used as I suppose I'd say an enhancement talent for other companies, and he's really fucking good. He's somebody that I've watched his entire career because he started the same sort of time in the scene that we did. And I wanted to give him a chance, and I was like, okay, so our very first show that we ran 2 years ago, I was like, I'll give you a match against this international who's flying over. And he immediately like exceeded expectations, and I was like, okay. So when next time he was available, I was like, I'm going to start putting you in these bigger profile matches, and if you can keep getting reactions and you can keep proving yourself, then we'll do that. And he came into the company as like a bad guy, and crowd reaction instantly turned him into a good guy because everyone loves the guy and he puts everything into it. And that was why when we lost Joel, or when we lost everything, I was like, well, it has to be him. And when the idea came up to put someone against an international, it had to be him, because I wanted to give him an opportunity, because the plan was always to put the belt on him in the future, just obviously not as soon. And I'm really disappointed that we've lost this show next weekend, because we had a big match for the kid.
So it sounds like an awful lot of building the show comes down to having that audience that you can't get at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. There's no point in, I mean, WWE and some of the other big companies, AEW, Progress and stuff are running. WWE for 2 years ran shows in their training center with no crowds, and then they put like all these screens, these big screens up, and they projected like you could book in to be like a face in the crowd sort of thing.
Yep.
And it was called the Thunderdome, and it was like that was how they dealt with it. Other people had like their roster members who weren't wrestling with the crowd. Progress, the big company in the United Kingdom, just run in an empty room, and it's really weird because there's nothing. There's just like no crowd. And I mean, we can't really do that in New Zealand because wrestling's still quite a niche thing here. But like we were also the first country post the first lockdowns to be able to run shows again. You know, I've run an entire year worth of shows in the time that some of my friends over in the United Kingdom and in Australia have just not been able to wrestle. I have friends in the United Kingdom and Australia who wrestled last like February, March of last year and haven't.
So just before everything hit the fan.
Yeah. And we ran an entire friggin' storyline, and we've changed our belt 3 times in that time. And I mean, there are people who, my friends who've got championships overseas, and they now have these like huge length championship reigns. But for what? They've done nothing, you know? And I feel for these companies who had all these massive plans and all these wrestlers who had these amazing things. Like the sheer number of people who have, during the lockdowns and stuff, retired, stepped away from the scene. We also had, during the first lockdown, we had the speaking out movement, where a whole bunch of people, mainly women in the wrestling scene, crowd members, roster members, people behind the scenes, all talked about the sexual harassment, sexual abuse, emotional abuse and stuff that happened to them. And it's rightfully so decimated the wrestling industry. And it's still an ongoing process, but it is making a positive change because it was the right time where people could say things, and there were people who were able to, you know, come out and try and say otherwise, because they couldn't go anywhere to do anything about it and stuff. And thankfully, it didn't affect what I was doing very much. I maybe lost 1 or 2 people that were on the fringes, but it's also, again, made me reevaluate how we do things. I've made sure that we run as a safe space. I make sure that I have female members of my team that are in positions of power. We have, you know, a really good system. If anyone has any complaints or any issues, I think it can come directly to us. And we, as a country, had an opportunity to set the standard for wrestling in the rest of the world. SPW down in Chicago are able to run, like, they usually run stadium shows as their big shows because they're like them and IPW in Auckland, like the biggest companies in New Zealand. And so we were able to run these massive shows where everyone else wasn't able to do anything. And it got a lot of eyes onto the New Zealand scene. So it meant all of us had to really step up our game. I have really been thankful to have the opportunity to have Tom Campbell, who is a member of a massive online wrestling community called Cultaholic, who also is like a radio presenter for BBC, has taken a real big interest in what we're doing. He put commentary on a video we had of one of our matches, which has gotten really, really good feedback.
Cool.
He's like our biggest supporter online, and every time we do anything, because we're able to do shows and they can't, I mean, it's opposite at the moment. The United Kingdom are running shows, but we're not. He was able to signal boost us, and it's been really, really lovely.
It must be very strange, though, having the, you know, the very formal, this is the BBC and let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah. He's got one of those really commanding voices and stuff, and it's real like he's like the ultimate nice guy. And I've seen what he does because he also is involved in wrestling outside of like the online community. He's a manager, he's a ring announcer, and like having someone of that, like that stature in the scene, like being involved in what we're doing, it's amazing. And so we were able to organize like we got a New Zealand wrestling like video podcast. We managed to organize an interview with him for them, which is really cool. So he's real invested in the New Zealand scene, and the real good thing that will come out of once the world's not on fire, is that there's more people interested in the New Zealand wrestling scene. The sheer number of people who have reached out to us at Heathens from overseas companies who are like desperate to come here and work, it's astronomical. I have, once we can fly people in from even just Australia, it'll be massive. We were supposed to be running this, like I said, our 2-year anniversary show in November was supposed to be an entire show of Heathen Combat versus an Australian company. They were going to fly their roster over, and now that can't happen. So instead, I have to provide a really cool story I've got that I'm running. I'm really excited for that. But it would have been even cooler if I could have had the show next weekend to give it a little bit of extra gravitas. And I'm really disappointed as well, because there's a really good name for the show next weekend, and now I can't run it.
What was the name?
RoboCop 4. Fuck off, RoboCop.
That's right. Yes, that is a
and it's the second year in a row I've had to cancel a September show with a great name, because I had to cancel last year's as well. Because of we were just coming out of level.
That's
just
right.
coming out of level 3 to level 2 last year.
Yeah.
Last September. So last year we lost Somebody Wake Up Billy Joe Armstrong. Because it was the 30th
it feels
of September.
It feels like a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I know, right? I come up with these awesome meme names and I can't use the shows.
So how does a lockdown like this mentally affect the wrestlers that you've got, the athletes that are out there?
So it does really affect people. Like last lockdown, we had like a group where we have every company has like a roster page, and the roster page is all the wrestlers who work the shows and stuff, and we're all real supportive, and we put posts up there and stuff and make sure how everyone's doing and things like that. With like obviously lots of group chats and stuff. Last year during the height of the lockdown, we had a group of us who daily would go on video calls together as a big group and play Cards Against Humanity, things like that. And just that you just gotta, there's some of us live alone, but some of us who are at complete other ends of the country. Like our roster spans from like Northland down to Invercargill.
That's a pretty big area.
Yeah. So we all make sure that we message each other on a regular basis to see how everyone's doing, because like literally yesterday, the wrestling community lost somebody to suicide, and it was horrific. And you just think about the effect on the mental health of people in these situations, especially over the last like 18-24 months. It shouldn't take a tragedy like what happened yesterday for not even just the international, but the New Zealand wrestling community to band together to try and back everyone.
I've worked with a lot of athletes over the last few years, and one of the things I've noticed that they are obviously very dedicated to what they're doing, and they have their goals and they work really hard to hit those goals. And when the goalposts move like they do in a lockdown, it can really hit them hard. Like it's like a slap in the face to them, and there's nothing that they feel at the time that they can do to get out of it. Like it must be such a horrible space to find. That's why I don't exercise. It's to look after my own mental health in the long run. But I've seen it happen where you have something like that, and then suddenly it just throws you. I was dealing with Olympians last year before they moved the Olympics, and it was exactly the same thing. It was suddenly, you've got an extra 12 months, and in their head they're going, yeah, but this is the time I can do now. 12 months I'll be older, I might be slower, we don't know what's going to happen.
You could get injured in that time.
Yeah, exactly. And like it really throws people. Same with Ironman last year, or earlier this year, it got postponed by 3 weeks. And they were in their taper period, so that they were at a point where they were pulling back and they weren't exerting as much so they could reserve energy. And then suddenly you've got an extra 3 weeks, so you've got to throw in more training, and you just it must be such an emotional strain for them.
I mean, like I said, we had to cancel entire shows. Like I said, it affects entire storylines. People get excited for things we had plans, like, hey, you've got this massive match against here, this massive marquee match, and so everyone sits down, they come up with these ideas of how the matches will go, like match formats and stuff, like we'll do this, and then you spend all this time working out how you're going to do something, and then you don't get to do it. And then you're like, okay, and then this has happened, and this person won't even be there. So, but that's kind of the thing with what wrestling is. I mean, cards subject to change. Yeah, it's a term of the trade. Everyone knows that, I mean, like I said, our last show we had in May, just about every single match had a change to it. We had somebody pull out the morning of the show, and so as we were setting up, we had one of our mates show up, and he was just came to help out, and I was like, "Do you have your gear with you?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Cool, man. Do you want to wrestle? You want to be on the show?" He's like, "Yeah." And it was like a real cool surprise for the crowd who had expected something,
Mm-hmm.
but we also then had to completely change what we had going for the guy who was there.
Yeah.
And how it would work with him, and how that match went again has changed what I've had to do moving forward for him entirely again.
So with all of the
Um,
mental gymnastics that you have to do
yeah,
for yourself as an organizer, how are you holding up with this? What are you doing to keep yourself sane?
I have a real good support crew. I have a couple of mates that I talk to regularly. We have like a group chat for, I think, heathen management, I suppose. And we always talk about, hey, this has happened, so we talk about ideas we can have to change it. I read a lot. I read a lot of manga. I watch a lot of horror films, stuff where I can just like turn my brain off. But I also have to set aside X amount of time every day to figure out, okay, so here's what I'm going to do moving forward. Um, and I
That's
have to
been a really
keep
common
an eye
theme.
on, yeah, I have to keep an eye on every company in New Zealand. One of the things with wrestling in New Zealand, because New Zealand is such a small scene, and there's like 12, 13 companies, which is, it sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, there's like that much in a single state in Australia,
Yeah.
you know? So I have to keep an eye on what every company's doing with every roster member that they have that we could possibly use, that what I don't do, or what I do and what I don't do doesn't affect what they're doing, out of consideration and stuff like that. And we do have quite a good little community. Like most of us do work together. We do, if I want to do something with someone I know who is important within a company, I'll have to message and be like, hey, this is what we're doing with this person. Is it going to affect what you're doing? I do have a couple of companies that I work directly with. And so like there's a company in Wellington that I work very closely with, and what we do storyline ties into what they're doing. Our championship belts have been defended and featured on each other's shows, and yeah, stuff like that. So, and it's as well, it's given me, the other thing as well is that I'm sitting and thinking, okay, so I've lost all this time due to these various things. What cool things can I do for the people that I have on my roster? What cool things can I do for them to make up for the opportunities they've lost? Like we are in the process of looking at different sort of shows that we can run. I'd love to be able to do something with the arts festivals. I'd love to do a company in Wellington called CPW ran a show recently at the Panhead Brewery, and I would absolutely love to be able to do one here in
Yeah.
Hamilton, Good George, and do something like that. These are the
Just
sorts of
clear
things
out
that
the
I want to
garden
do.
bar.
Yeah, something like that, or even
Well,
like
they've got a car park
in,
next door, haven't they? Like there's
yeah,
a
or
big car park.
they've also bought a whole bunch of the warehouses around them, and they're building
Oh, perfect.
they've got breweries and their stuff. So something like that. And that's the sort of things I'm doing, is I'm thinking, okay, so I've lost these opportunities. What other opportunities can I replace them with? What can I do to um, reward the people who've stuck around? What can I do to thank the people? Opportunities can I do for the guys who were just starting out their journeys into wrestling before lockdown happened?
What's been the
So
reactions from the fans? Obviously they'll be a bit disappointed when things like this happen.
yeah, like people are obviously disappointed and stuff, but also people are real understanding. I think, like, I've seen people getting frustrated overseas when things get cancelled and stuff, but everyone here in New Zealand's actually been really, really good. Like the New Zealand wrestling community, as I said, is really, it's not a huge community, but we're all real supportive, because everyone goes to everyone else's shows because there's only, you know, so many wrestlers to go around.
Yeah.
And it's been real cool to see that, okay, we've lost a show and everyone's upset about it and stuff. And I said, oh, it's all good. We'll refund you your tickets and stuff. And there's no like, oh, blah, blah, blah. That's just thing. And everyone gets it. As a
Kind of used
country,
to
New
it
Zealand,
now.
yeah, as a country, in New Zealand, everyone's really, really open about what's going on. Like, there's no point in me trying to hide behind bullshit. You
Yeah.
know, I am the face of the company. You know, I'm the one who's on the videos announcing things. I'm the one who runs all the socials. I'm the one who does everything. So it's if I come out and I say flat out we can't run this show because of this, or this has happened, then people know that I'm not making things up.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, with the nationwide lockdown, everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's in the same boat. It's
And even if we could run shows at the moment, like hypothetically we could run a show in level 3, a good chunk of my roster are in Auckland, so
yeah,
I'd lose my friggin' champion
yeah,
because he's up in Auckland at the moment. You know, what's the point of me running that show then? You know,
yeah,
so
exactly.
I'd rather wait to a point where I can get everyone.
Which makes sense. So
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because this thing is apparently timed. I don't know if that actually works or not with the timer on Zoom, but they tell me that it does.
That's all good.
Best advice you can give to people to get them through lockdown crazies?
Have a support crew.
Mhm.
Have a group of people that you talk to on the regular, and find something that you have that you can switch your brain off and do, be it gaming, movies, books, cooking, walking, anything like that. Find something that doesn't even be something you're passionate about, something that you can do that gets you through it if you feel that you're struggling and you need help and you talk to someone, then talk to someone. Don't let the fact that you can't see someone face to face stop you from talking to them, and check in on, like I said on my thing when everything happened yesterday morning, when we woke up and we found out that Daphne had passed away. Check in on your friends, not just the ones who you know are suffering, but everyone, because you never know when somebody doesn't know how to reach out.
Very good advice. Where can we find you online?
You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Heathen Combat. One word.
And what I'll do is I'll leave links for that in the description so people can just scroll down and find them there. Be very easy to hunt you down. Thank you very much for this, Michael. It's much appreciated.
No worries, man. Anytime. Good to see you.
Shakespeare with punches is by far one of the best lines I've heard doing these interviews. I want to thank Michael Greene for coming along and showing me, who's not really a big wrestling aficionado, exactly how much work goes into organising these events and how down to the wire it can actually be trying to craft storytelling techniques that really engage the audience. If you want to follow Michael, then you can have a look down below in the description. There'll be a whole bunch of information there on Heathen Combat. And join us again for another episode next time. Thanks a lot.